Hi everyone, I'm Daniel. Superfang and I are back for talking about the City of Archives, scenario number 6 of the Forgotten Age, and there's so much to talk about here. I've been thinking about this one all week before we've been recording about what am I going to say?
There's a lot to say.
There really is. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at sort of our usual thing. We walk through the scenario, and one thing to note is that the setup, in fact, makes us do something completely different.
Indeed. Yes. As you may know from last scenario, we ended a bit of a cliffhanger. As we come to the scenario, we realize that we have been transported and also transformed. We find ourselves in the City of Archives, also known as Nakatis, in a body of a Yithian. We've been transformed into this eldritch creature. Um, and these creatures are interviewing us. They're very curious as to what we do and how we are and stuff like that. And immediately we are given a choice whether or not to uh, cooperate them or resist their captivity. And that choice will matter for the setup of the scenario. And why don't we just go right on into that? Because a very, very big thing happens almost immediately. It has to do with this card.
Mhm.
So you'll see here that one of the steps is replace each player's investigator card with a body of a Yithian investigator card, which is right over here.
Where'd you put it?
So, oh, it's over here.
Oh,
Sorry, next
hey,
to the
there we go.
campaign guide. So, this is your investigator for this scenario. There are obviously some rules about this. Like, for example, you still have all of your signature cards unless they are unique item assets, which actually you have to remove from your deck. Um, Other examples of unique item assets that you may or may not have, of course, is these two cards, these campaign cards, the Expedition Journal and the Relic of Ages. So just keep that in note that you'll have to remove those, as well as Becky, for example. Becky
Wen-
doesn't exist.
Wendy's amulet.
Indeed. That would have been very nice. Um, so those do not exist. They will be removed. However, you will get them back as long as you survive the scenario, of course. You also have to remove Alejandro for reasons. Um, Although I guess you don't remove Ishchaka, so Ishchaka is going to join you along
Yep.
if she's here, which is really funny. Anyway,
Should we
so this
talk
is your
about?
investigator.
Yeah, we should talk about what's on the front of this card. So twos across the board for stats.
Yep. 7 health and 7 sanity, which is actually pretty all right,
Hmm.
especially if maybe you have some trauma in a bad area. Um, each of your ally assets gain the Yithian trait. I don't believe this has any actual bearing. It's just a nice bit of flavor, if I recall.
I think you're right.
And lastly, its investigator ability, which is the most important bit, is as a reaction after you commit a skill test to a sorry, after you commit a card to a skill test you are performing, you double the skill icons on that card, limit once per test. So, a couple gotchas here. First, it has to be a skill that you are performing. So, if you commit a card to someone else, you don't get to double those skill icons. Um, and you can only do it once per test. So, choose wisely on which one you want to double.
But you can take more than one test per turn or during the Mythos phase, so you can commit cards then and still use the ability.
Of course.
The other sign,
Lastly, yeah, +2 and draw card is a very like I want that stapled on an investigator somewhere. I mean, it's basically Harvey Walters, right?
yep,
Um, so
Daisy
pretty
gets a
good.
little better than that when she gets
Oh,
another
that
sign.
that is true. Albeit most of the time it's an auto fail.
Yep, yep. So
um,
the 7/7 you mentioned already that the health and sanity are here. It is really interesting to note that of course your trauma does carry over from
yes.
your your regular investigator. Which when I've talked to people about this, they're like, "Why? It's not
Yeah,
my
maybe
body."
right. Maybe if like the it'd be very flavorful if the mental trauma carried over, but not the physical. I don't know how maybe that would work, but that would be interesting.
Yeah, that might be. Maybe they thought about that and said like that people are going to game that too much.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What's on the other side?
Good question. Lots of very, very good flavor. The deck size is what it used to be when you were human. The deck building options, you can't build decks though, which is kind of weird. And do you remember your deck building requirements? Honestly, sometimes I don't. So who knows?
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
we'll talk maybe more about the backside later because maybe
Hmm.
that's relevant.
Indeed. All right. Well, that is the first bit of setup. As I said, removing unique item assets. And then we have a reaction to the choice that you made. whether or not you cooperated with the Yithians or resisted captivity. So, if you cooperated with the Yithians, you're going to be starting in the interview room arrival chamber. If you resisted captivity, you're going to be in the restraining chamber. And on the flip side, if you cooperated with the Yithians, there's going to be a Yithian observer where you are. Luckily, as stated on the first act, they're going to gain aloof, so they won't attack you. And also, you're going to get a clue for sharing your knowledge from them. But if you resisted captivity, you start with a Yithian observer in the victory display, which they have victory 1, and that is really nice.
Yep, it's these guys down here.
Yeah,
we've seen them before. They are in the core set.
Yes, but they are pretty tough to deal with. That 4 fight is especially bad now that everyone only has 2 stats. 2s in their stats, I mean. Yeah. Okay, so which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with the resisting captivity.
Sounds good. I don't know why that happened. Weird. Oh, yeah, that's great. Because you're supposed to randomize these two.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, we have resisted captivity, so we are starting in the restraining chamber. Our goal is to collect 2 per investigator clues. And as I said before, if we cooperated with it, everyone gets 1 clue. So technically, you would only need to get 1 per clues.
That's right.
Okay, so let's start with this room. So we are in the restraining chamber, 4 shroud, 1 per clues, victory 1. As an action parlay, you can test intellect 4 or combat 4 to interrogate the captive mind restrained here. If you succeed, remember that you have interviewed a subject. If you fail, take 2 horror. So this is the kind of thing about this scenario is there's going to be a lot of remembering that you something, and we'll see why we need those later on.
Yeah, at this point, it's kind of like Carcosa, the Unspeakable Oath scenario, where there's some things that don't make a whole lot of sense on the locations quite yet.
Indeed. All right, next interview room, we got the arrival chamber, so you would have started here if we cooperated. 2 shrouds, 0 clues, reaction after you begin your turn in this location. If there is a Yithian enemy in this location, you draw a card. That is very nice. There will already be a Yithian observer there if you cooperated, so you get some free card draw. And card draw in this scenario is very, very important because in order to actually do anything with the body of a Yithian, you really do need to commit cards. So getting more cards is good.
And there's another reason why you need them too, and we'll get
Indeed. There. Yes. All right, and here's our third interview room. It's an Ichor-filled chamber. 1 shroud, 1 per clues with victory 1. Nice, but after you enter this location, you have to rotting remains yourself.
Yep. And
that's tough.
It's not even when you reveal a location.
Yep.
So if you come in here by yourself and you can't get those clues, it is a 1 shroud location, but
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and then you put you put one of these on there, and then you're like, oh god.
So, as you said, the one that you choose is going to be this one or this one, and then the other 2, which is always going to include the interview room that is the Ichor-filled chamber, the rotting remains one, will be you won't know which one this is because it'll be random with the other one.
Indeed. So there's always a risk going to the other ones, especially because they have victory. So you want to go to them.
Yeah, so if you start with the cooperating, the +1 card is nice, but you do need to pick up 4 clues somehow on 2-player clues, and that kind of requires that you go to both of these locations or
no.
Here.
If you cooperated, you already start with 1 per clues.
You're right.
It's kind of as if there were 1 per clues here, and you kind of already discovered them. So you only need to go to 1 others. If you started in the restraining chamber, you'll need to get this one and the other 2.
Okay, I had it backwards. You're absolutely right. You do need to. There may be a reason why you might want to start with cooperating with the Yithians, because you really only have to go to one of these other locations, or you just go over here.
Yeah. So there are these 3 locations here. They're all the same Halls of Nakatis, just different versions of them. They also all have the same text and also 1 clue. As a free trigger, during your turn, you can choose and discard a card from your hand to move to another copy of Halls of Nakatis. So it's a free move during your turn for the cost of 1 card.
Yep, it's a good way to move around.
It is indeed. And if you're in lower player count, so true solo or even 2-player, like having the 1 clues on here may mean that you don't actually need to go to the other one, which can be good.
So this is another use of cards. If you have too many cards in hand. Maybe you want to get rid of one by
Any card can be a shortcut.
exactly. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah,
The
it's
limit
cool.
once per turn refers to this ability. It doesn't refer to the same ability on a different card.
Correct.
So you can
All right.
also do this on someone else's turn.
Except it does say during your turn.
Right. Don't do that.
They thought about that.
They did.
I'm going to do it during the Mythos phase. That'd be cool. Anyway, so that's kind of the beginning of the scenario. Pretty straightforward. However, when we do advance, that is when things start to go wild. So shall we?
Mm-hmm.
When we advance, we will put each other set-aside location into play. So let's bring those out. We have 5 new locations. The first one is the Deconstruction Room, which I think is over here. And we have the Towers of Nakadas, the Yithian Orrery, the Laboratory of the Great Race. Oh, that's what there it is. And then the Great Library.
There's a lot of locations here.
A lot of new locations. And at one of those locations, randomly, we will spawn the Custodian. So here's the Custodian, and I'll read him when we get to him, because our next act is we will need to do a certain number of these things, similar to Carcosa, where we need 3 of the following. So we need to find the process, dissect an organ, interview a subject, realize what year it is, activate the device, and control the Custodian. That's 6 things we could do. And we've already seen one of them here.
Indeed.
Yeah. So now our job is to go around and do the things. Let's say the Custodian spawned here.
Okay.
We should mention. Actually, maybe we don't mention this now. But the agendas are very weird in this scenario. This one says that you cannot put item S's into play, including item weaknesses. I love how they had to put that. Yeah. This is tough.
So yeah, no item assets into play, and item weaknesses includes Dexter Drake's weakness.
Wait, which one is that? Oh yeah.
Occult
Yes.
Scraps.
Occult Scraps.
So he gets -2 willpower when it's in his hand.
Yes. The Necronomicon, Daisy's Necronomicon. That's an item, right?
I'm not sure if that one's an item. One of those, or maybe Min's is not an item. One of them is just a tome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm searching the Necronomicon now. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, this is a kind of another gotcha. So you didn't get to bring your unique items along with you. So if you decide to spend 8 experience points and buy the gold pocket watch right before playing the scenario, don't do that.
Yeah.
But then
Indeed.
you can't play items at all at the beginning, and some investigators really are thinking about that. Of course, with the investigator ability to commit cards and doubling their skill icons, that makes the items still kind of useful, but you might want them later.
Indeed. All right, so I have confirmed. Yes, the King in Yellow is not an item. However, the Necronomicon is, which
Weird.
is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could not resolve its revelation effect, which means I guess it just stays in your hand until you wait. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. It stays in
Anyway.
your hand, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I believe it stays in your hand, and then maybe like when it no longer. We'll think about it later.
Mm-hmm. Dexter, though, that one's tough.
That one is tough for Dexter, for sure.
All right. Shall we advance the agenda too?
Sure. Hey, each investigator searches the top 9 of their deck and puts up to 2 item assets from them. Sorry, draws them, and then you shuffle the deck. So you get 2 free draws, which is actually very, very nice. And then if the Custodian's in play, we'd move them somewhere else. This is the first time the agenda has been nice to me. I don't know about you.
It is nice, but sometimes it's because the previous agenda was not very nice.
True.
I have whiffed on this before, and that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, no, also sometimes you just draw the items before you flip the agenda, so you're like, well, I can't do anything with these.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or if
Okay.
you're like a mystic, all things are spells.
Yeah, that's right. No items to pick up.
Yeah.
So the next agenda is starting this process of saying, uh-oh, those cards that you were keeping in hand for all kinds of reasons, uh-oh, maximum hand size is reduced by 2.
Yep. Not only is that tricky for the body of Yithian stuff where you want to commit cards and draw cards, but it will be tricky for ending the scenario, which we will get to in just a bit.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's look at the different tasks you can do. So notably, you need to do 3 to advance, but there's an opportunity to do more as well.
Yep. You want to start with the custodian?
Yep.
So when you're at his location, first of all, the first reaction is actually only if you control them. So first, as an action, if the custodian is not controlled by a player, an investigator at the custodian's location can parlay to test intellect 3. If you succeed, you place one of your clues on it. This is very important. They're not for the token pool. It says your clues, which is very weird that it says this, honestly. I feel like they don't normally do this.
No,
I
in
don't
this
know
very
what
same campaign, right? In Threads of Fate, you put clues from the token pool on like Marina
Yeah.
Silva or Henry DeVoe or whoever they are.
Yeah. Honestly, I wish they did not do that for this one specifically because it's really annoying.
It's hard, right?
It is hard. Yeah. But ultimately, you need to get one per clues on it, and then if you do, you will take control of the custodian. And the custodian has a reaction when the investigation phase begins. Each investigator at the custodian's location draws a card, which is again good for Body of Yithian and also good for later on.
Really good.
Really good. All right, so we have here the Laboratory of the Great Race. 2 shard, 1 per clues. If there are no clues here, you can test Agility 3 to activate the device. If you fail, though, you place a clue back on the Laboratory of the Great Race, so you have to get it back off in order to do it.
Yuck.
Yeah, Agility 3 is tough, especially since most people don't pack a lot of cards that have agility symbols on them. So you'll need to figure out how to pass that test.
Next.
All right, yeah, let's go to the Yithian Orrery. 4 shroud, 1 per clues, victory 1. As a double action, if there are no clues on it, you can realize what year it is. Luckily, it's not a test. It is a double action, and you will have to get all the clues off, but it's okay. It also has a static effect. While you're in the Yithian Orrery, you increase your maximum hand size by 2. So that currently negates the agenda, which is very nice.
Lots of victory points around in this scenario, but it does
Indeed.
take some work.
It does. All right, we got the Deconstruction Room. 3 shroud, 1 per clues, another victory 1. This time it's a combat test of 4. And it gets +1 difficulty for each clue on Destruction Room. So theoretically, it could be a test of 8. That seems bad.
If you just
I
go
guess
in
you could-
there in 4-player, yeah.
Yeah, and also maybe you move some more clues in there for some reason.
Janae, no, don't do it.
No, I mean Janae is actually great in this scenario.
Yeah, she would move them off, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, if you succeed, you have dissected an organ. So pretty straightforward, but that is a very hard test.
All right, that's this wing.
And we got down here connected to the western corridors. We have the Great Library. 2 shroud, 4 clues, static ability. Weird. As an action, you spend 1 per clues to test intellect 3. If you succeed, you have found the process. Intellect 3, I found, is usually not so bad. A lot of people have good intellect commits, but spending the clues as a cost, meaning that if you fail, you have to get those clues again, is pretty bad.
And it's your own clues again, so that's tough.
Yeah, and it's not as a group either. So that's also tough. So one person has to have 1 per clues. And also, this will refill to 4 clues at the end of the round if there are not 4 clues there.
Yeah, so you always get the clues to pick them up again, but yikes.
Yikes. Lastly, we have the Towers of Niconis. There's actually nothing to do here except get victory 2. Holy shit. You can discard as an action, discard any number of cards from your hand. You shuffle your discard pile into your deck and then draw that many cards +1. So if you really don't like the cards in your hand, then get some more if you like.
I like this. This is also for cards that got discarded from your hand for whatever reason that you want to get back into your deck, basically.
Ah, yes, because it shovels your discard pile into your deck. That's very nice.
Mm-hmm. So this is like more useful than I think it looks.
Yeah.
Based on kind of the rest of what happens in the scenario, you really don't want to just like lose some of your really good cards. Remember the items that you thought you couldn't play at the beginning of the scenario? Well, maybe they're in your discard pile and you'd like to go get them back.
Indeed. And perhaps if you're, heavy into events like you're a Nat Cho or a Preston Fairmont, then you can get all of those events back as well, which is very nice.
Yeah. Okay. That's all locations, right?
That is all of the locations.
Well, we did 3 of those things. Let's advance the act again.
Yeah. So you no longer have to perform any more. However, doing more of them will be better for you. And so you can keep this next to the act deck as a reminder. Your final goal is to do as many of them as you can. And If each if each surviving investigator has 10 or more cards in their hand, you advance. So you need to get 10 cards in hand, which is very tough. Not only is that 2 more than your normal hand size, but this agenda deck is already decreasing your maximum hand size by some amount. Luckily, there is an action on this card to spend a clue to draw. You draw 2 cards instead of 1 if your hand size, normally you draw 2 instead of 1. If your hand size exceeds your maximum hand size, you draw an additional card. So I believe what this means, and I've always not really confident on this, but your hand needs to exceed your max hand size when you take the action, and that's when you draw 3. It's not like you draw 2. Oh, if you go over, you draw another one. Is that correct?
I think so. That's how it reads to me, but I don't think the wording here is super clear.
Yeah, indeed. It's been a point of contention. But I believe like if your max hand size is 8 and then you have 9 cards, you will draw 3. Otherwise, if you have less than that, you will only draw 2.
I agree with that.
Okay. Lastly, each Yetian observer gains Hunter, which at this point, if they're still alive, they will start moving around since they don't normally have Hunter.
So this is the one that maybe you left behind in the arrival chamber. Maybe it starts to move around by this point.
Indeed. Okay, that is the act. We'll get to the resolutions in a bit. The other agenda, I think all this does. Oh, yes, that's right. Again, shuffle the discard product, move the custodian if he's not controlled. This is the one time that the pendant is useful. Each investigator with the pendant will draw 2 cards, and for the remainder of that scenario, each investigator with the pendant ignores any effect that would reduce their maximum hand size. That is very, very, like, it's basically a surefire way to get out of this scenario. Because otherwise, your max hand size is reduced by 4. That's crazy.
You know, I just realized if you have drawing the sign, the weakness,
yes.
you can just ignore it.
Get wrecked.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is really tough to go from 4 to 10 if you have no way of spending clues, right?
Indeed.
Again, like everything else we've seen here, you need to be the one that has the clues in order to draw the extra number of cards.
Yes. Basically, the best you can do is just take 3 basic draw actions, which will be 3 cards, so it'll be at 7, which is not enough. So you'll have to figure out other ways to do it. Maybe you have other investigators spend cards to draw things, get you clues. You basically need clues no matter what.
So if you're a fighter and you weren't planning on getting clues in any way, shape, or form, you need to get the pendant.
Yes. I guess you could also take the Offer of Power, one of the treacheries, which can draw you cards.
The other thing is you can sit in the Yithian Orrery because that increases your max hand size by 2, so you can get kind of close there.
Yes.
So you could take 3 basic draws, I think. That gets you to 9.
Yes. And then in your upkeep, you could get to 10.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's kind of okay. Now, the problem with this is, so of course, as you can see here, everyone has to have 10 at the same time.
Yep.
And not before you want to go either. But if you draw a weakness or some other card that puts itself into play, that's really tough, right? You have to be careful when you're drawing to not just draw something that, like you're timing. You're like, I'm going to draw 3 cards, and then I'll get my 4th in upkeep, and then we're good. If any one of those is a weakness that goes into play, well, you've lost out on the card draw.
And not only that, most likely you're going to be above your hand limit, so you have to discard a bunch, and you've wasted some progress.
Exactly. So that I think can be really difficult if you are, I don't know, at the end of the scenario, right?
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, I think that is mostly this. That is the scenario, unless we talk about the encounter cards.
Let's talk about what happens when you advance, I think.
Sure. All right. So if you do actually get here, we go to R1, which is over here. Oh yeah, there's some clarifications on Body of the Yithian, by the way, if you're curious. Okay, resolution 1. So we need to check how many we were able to complete. If all 6 were completed, you get 4 bonus experience. Oh my god.
There's so much XP here.
Yes, I never counted, but I think it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the scenario that you could get.
Including the 2 on the towers.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the 2 Yithian observers.
And then 4
So-
from here.
4 from that. Yeah, that's crazy. Getting all 6 is also really, really hard. So you definitely worked at it.
Mm-hmm.
If you did 5, you only get 2 bonus experience. Actually, I think that I get 5 pretty consistently. Getting those 2 bonus experience is very, very nice.
Totally agree.
4, you only get 1 bonus experience. Sad. And also the process backfired, which we will get to in the next interlude. And 3, the process backfired spectacularly. Here's also the important bit. So if everyone was defeated, or if the agenda advanced, if I'm correct with it, yes.
Yep.
So everyone defeated. It doesn't matter how many of them you did, correct?
You go to
You go to this part.
Yeah, if everyone was defeated. If one person
Yes.
was defeated, it's fine.
Correct. That does mean though that is that like if you doom out, no matter what, you're going here. Because everyone is defeated when you doom out. Anyway, the investigators have their memories sponged, they're driven insane, and you lose. So don't lose.
The end.
The end. Yeah, so this scenario in particular is very not necessarily famous, but it's very notorious for having the lost in time and space effect, where I'm like, I think it might be time for me to die so that we continue. Then I will sacrifice myself because I'm not a Kluver, and then everyone else can get out, as an example.
As long as the remaining people can get out, basically. 'Cause
Exactly.
You still have to get those 10 cards in hand.
Yeah, but like that's what it is sometimes. It's like one person is like, "Oh, I can get to 10 easy," and then like one other person is like, "I will never do that," and I'm like, "It might be time for you to die."
Well, the other part that's kind of interesting is we'll get to the interlude later, but it's not necessarily great if that happens too early, right? You don't want the
Correct.
process to backfire, especially not spectacularly.
Indeed.
Okay, let's look at the encounter sets. Interestingly, none of them we've seen before in this campaign. Except
Correct.
I don't even think these we've seen.
Correct. We've seen Locked Door.
These probably
Yes.
from
Yes.
but nothing here is from the rest of the Forgotten Age box in general. Everything
Yes,
is either
feels-
core set or specific to this scenario.
Exactly. Yeah, let's start with some enemies that can pop up. So we have the Scholar from Yith 222, Monster Yithian, prey most cards in hand. Forced, when he attacks you, you discard 2 random cards from your hand. Ouch. Don't let him attack you. That's tough.
Also, don't forget this. It's like it's kind of sneaky that it's in there.
It is. Is an action if this enemy is ready and engaged with you, you can parlay to test 3 intellect. If you succeed, you draw a card and evade the Scholar of Yith. If you fail, though, the Scholar of Yith attacks you. If you can pull off that parlay, it's very nice. Otherwise, I wouldn't risk it, honestly.
Yeah, like it's harder to do the parlay than it is to fight.
Yeah. Having 2 health is nice, especially if you have a fighter that has a gun, or some kind of +1 damage asset. Because hitting that 2 combat isn't going to be so bad, especially when we talk about the tokens. Having 2 base combat and then some boosts from the guns is usually enough to kill these guys in one shot.
As long as you can play the gun.
As long as you can play the gun. Exactly. So maybe
So-
Mystics are very good in this scenario.
It's true. So there's 3 of these guys, and they're the only enemies that never get Hunter.
Correct. You can't evade them then. All right, we have Keeper of the Great Library, 3/4 health and 3 evade. It spawns in the Great Library. As a note, though, these guys are in the encounter deck to start off with, meaning that if you draw them during that first act, they will just fizzle because the Great Library won't be in play, which is a nice free encounter card.
It really is.
Yeah. They have Alert and Aloof, so they won't do anything unless an investigator has found the process, realized what year it is, or yes, then they will gain Hunter. So they're watching out for those people.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, we have the Scientist of Yith, just some swapped or some different stats for 3 health and 1 evade. It spawns at the Laboratory of the Great Race, also has Aloof, and they're looking for activating the device or dissecting an organ. So, if I'm not mistaken, so this is the Great Library,
Mhm.
and this is where you find the process. So, obviously, if you find the process in the Great Library, then it's going to be there. However, realizing what year it is the Yithian Orrery. So, if you do that one first, they'll at least have to move all the way over to get to you.
That's right.
The scientist of Yith, however, is activated a device and dissected an organ, which are these two, meaning that they are always going to be nearby if you do those. So I usually find that the scientist of Yith is a bigger threat.
I think they're a bigger threat because of the 2 damage.
That is also true.
That is tricky.
Definitely does not help.
Very tough to fight these guys. Easy to evade, but evading hunter enemies is not always the best thing.
Indeed. All right, so we've gone over the enemies. These cards, I'll say these first 2 cards are kind of where the meat of the scenario is in my mind, and we'll get to why that is. But basically, let's start with the Yithian presence. So it's treachery that goes into play in your threat area. If there is a Yithian enemy at your location, you cannot investigate that location or trigger action abilities on encounter cards. So this is something that I feel like not a lot of people know, but encounter cards aren't just the ones that come from the encounter deck, which I know it doesn't make any sense. But for example, locations are encounter cards. So if a location has an action ability, you cannot trigger that ability.
That's right.
Hey, also, agendas are encounter cards. So if you have this on you and there's a Yithian there, you cannot take this draw action. Kind of need to take the draw action though at the end. So that's bad.
By the way, I think this is the only bolded draw action in the game.
Indeed, and also that's going to matter later or just in a bit.
Yep.
But anyway, it does nicely remind you that you cannot take the action ability on itself if there's a Yithian. So hopefully you can get rid of the Yithian. But discarding 2 cards from hand to discard it is also pretty bad, especially when you're losing cards left and right.
Mm-hmm. At the point in which you have to sort of shed cards because you have to get down to your maximum hand size of 4, it's okay.
Yeah,
and I kind of like the moving around the map with the Hall's ability for that too.
That's true.
You start to look at your cards in your hand as a totally different resource. That said, at some point you do need the cards, so
yeah. Yeah. And here we go. So I hate this card. This by far has the most feel bads. Maybe because I start with the not cooperating more often than not. Anyway, you put into play your threat area. However, if you have or if anyone has interviewed a subject, you take a horror and it gains surge. Why? Why?
I know. And you cannot take draw actions.
Hey, what was that action that was a bolded draw? That's the only one in the game, so they specifically you couldn't be able to do it with this card in your third area. Hey, it's that one you need to do to win the game. So that's tough. Anyway, you can take a willpower action to discard it, which like it's tough because there's a lot of willpower tests in this scenario. So like you're gonna be hard pressed for willpower commits, but I feel like I honestly need to save them for this or Frozen in Fear, for example.
There's 3 of these.
Yeah, there's
3 of the Yithian presence as well.
Yep.
Okay.
I wish it didn't give surge. I'll take a horror. Just like
so what I do is I just don't do that. I just don't interview a subject, or I go back and do it last. Right? Like
yeah, that's fair.
Having this gain surge throughout the entirety of the scenario, I think, is tough.
It is tough. All right. So next we have Captive Mind. Test willpower 0. Regardless of the skill test succeeds or fails, choose and discard all but X cards from your hand. X is your modified skill value for this test. I really, really like the design of this card. I wish they did more of this stuff. They did something similar in Circle Undone in the Clutches of Chaos, correct? Right. I like these cards because it's like you're basically cannot fail. So you might have other effects that like if you fail, whatever. But it's about how much you succeed by. So things that affect or that are based on how much you succeed by, you can do things really well with. Obviously, you want to succeed by a lot with this anyway, just because you want to keep those cards. But it's kind of like a test that is always suited to how many cards you have in your hand, if that makes sense. It's interesting.
It's really confusing, I think, when people first read it. They're like, all but, okay. Yeah, right. So your modified skill value is after you draw the token, you add up all of those numbers together, and then that's the number of cards that you can keep in your hand.
Yeah, effectively, it's kind of like it's like doing a skill test, and the result is that's how many cards you get to keep. You got to discard everything else.
So draw the autofail here.
Yay!
It's just as bad as the -5 in most cases, except for
Indeed.
if you're trying to protect the -5 by. I mean, it's also part of the question of like using cards from your hand to pass this test is weird, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I wonder. So, if I recall, maybe it's because of how it works, but like it's very similar to if it just said test willpower X, where X is the number of cards in hand. For each point you fail by, discard a card, right? Um, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there would be a difference. Would there be a difference?
I have to think about that.
Yeah.
I guess they don't want you to like have any other failure components to it. Like you can't just toss take heart at this or whatever.
Right. And also there are these the simple tokens that all have if you fail effects.
That's right.
And so those won't trigger with the test 0. Which is nice.
Unless you get the auto fail.
Exactly. 1 in 17.
What's the other one? 13th vision.
Yeah.
You fail ties.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes.
But that's the other part of it though. Like even if you don't commit and you draw like a -5 or something, it's just as bad as failing the test. You just are going to discard all of your cards anyway.
This is the ultimate Daryl Simmons negator.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe they should do more of that then.
Exactly. All right. Finally, we got Lost Humanity. Revelation test willpower 5. That's a big one. For each point you fail by, remove the top card of your deck from the game. If there are fewer than 10 total cards in your hand, deck, and discard pile, you are driven insane. I don't know. This has never happened to me. Have you ever had this ever happen to you?
No, this is very hard to have happen, right? Because it's your hand, deck, and discard pile. You have to like
so
this multiple times.
Exactly. Like on average, you would have 30 cards in your deck. Especially even if you lost some unique cards, you got some signature cards. So around 30 to 35. So this card would need to hit 6 times, and you would need to fail by 5 on every single. Sorry. It would have to hit 4 times, failing by 5 on each of them for you to even come close to doing this.
True, but things that are in play, like if you played items or spells, those don't count towards the 10, right?
That's true. So maybe it's like 3 times and you fail by 5 each time, something similar to that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it could happen, but honestly, just removing cards from your deck can be problematic depending on what it is. It's not the worst thing in the counter deck, though, really.
Exactly. Yeah.
But to me, it's like kind of the inverse of Captive Mind, where it's a tough skill test that I figure I'm going to fail. I don't want to fail by more than like 2, if I can help it. But I've had this remove weaknesses before, and then you're like, okay, thank you.
Now we're talking. Indeed.
Let's continue the willpower parade of tests.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. We got our classic Rotting Remains, Frozen in Fear, and Dissonant Voices here. So Rotting Remains, honestly, I think Rotting Remains is fine. Like you have more horror. You have what am I trying to say? For the people who are afraid of Rotting Remains, you will have more sanity to deal with. Yes, it can kill you. But like of these 3 cards, it's Frozen in Fear that really worries me, because you have to be able to reliably move around and fight things in order to actually do anything in this scenario. So this can really, really stop everyone.
I think I'm scared of both of them. The Rotting Remains problem is that they have a Rotting Remains on a location already.
Sure.
And there's other ways to get horror, like the where is it, Cruel Interrogations. That's tough. I think there's not maybe as many other things like besides the Offer of Power maybe that will give you horror. I just think Rotting Remains is so easy to fail here. And
that's true.
And there's 3 of them.
Yeah. I feel like basically what I mean to say is that if I were to prioritize willpower commits, I would prioritize them for Frozen in Fear than Rotting Remains.
That's fair. I've just seen some of my teammates go down because of the Rotting Remains. Like they drew
fair enough.
They drew 2 of them, and because you already have trauma on your Githian body, that was the end.
Fair enough, yeah. Lastly, Dissonant Voices. Luckily, I mean, you're mostly committing cards, but it would be nice to play your stuff.
Yeah. It's nice at the beginning of the game, right?
Yeah, especially. All right, we got our servants of Hastur. Is that what this set is? Yeah.
No, this is
Um.
the agents of
Oh, Yogg-Sothoth. That's right.
Yogg-Sothoth. Yeah.
Yes. So offer of power. It's very flavorful, I think. Obviously, like you can kind of game it with the agenda stuff, but you're mostly taking to horror, especially when you have card hand size reduction. I mean, it's really usually just take the horror.
Yeah, I think you have to because the two
Yep.
doom probably will matter.
Yeah. And yeah, we already talked about Yithian Observer. You are going to most likely just evade this one rather than fight it. I mean, I have killed these in the past. They are just really tough. If you can, obviously do it. But like you have this guy is 4 fight. These guys are 3 fight, which sometimes you need to stretch for, especially in this scenario. And also, I mean, that's normally why I resist capture, because getting one of these out of the deck is actually really huge for me. What do you think?
Yeah, and I agree with that. It also has the effect just like the Scholar, where if it attacks you, you discard cards, and that's bad.
Yeah, indeed.
I think that, yeah, it's only 1 card, but then it also, if you've run out of cards, then it starts to really kill you. I really love all of these encounter cards here. The last 3 we won't have to say much about, but they're all basically doing 2 things. One is like dinging you for horror, and then attacking your hand's size or your cards in hand. And those are the things that keep you from winning the game, basically.
Yep.
I think these things are really tough. This is this combo of all these things are really going to slow a lot of investigators down, especially since they're in their Yithian bodies. And I mentioned at the beginning that we've not seen most of these cards before. And there's a reason I mentioned it. It's because you haven't really been taught to protect these kinds of things in this campaign.
That is true. Good point.
So no agility test, nothing dealing with poison, of course. I don't know what else TFA usually has you do, but it's just kind of, I don't want to say like classic Arkham, but it's really getting back to a completely different way that you've been taught to deal with this campaign's challenges. And that's one of the reasons why this scenario, I think, can be such a shock. It's not just you have a different investigator card. Okay. It's not just not dealing with items. Okay, that's another thing. It's all of these things together are pretty foreign. Flavorful for this scenario, though. You are in an alien body on an alien planet. We're far from home.
Indeed. If I had any advice for this scenario, it would be to take that 1 red card that I can't think about right now that discards things, encounter cards in play.
Yeah, Alter Fate.
Alter Fate, or Logical Reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
Because getting rid of these 3 terrors is literally a godsend. So if you wanted advice on how to prep for that scenario, that's how you prep for it.
No, you're right. Those things they're huge.
Yep.
And Alter Fate, especially the level 3 version, is fast, so that really helps out with the action economy.
Yep.
Oof. Yeah, and if you fail this, if you get defeated or everyone does, that's the end of the campaign, which I think is it's tough because again, you're not preparing for this sort of challenge. I have a little list of things I wanted to talk about beyond before we even talk about the rest of the. Oh, well, let's do the scenario reference card. Forgot about that.
Yeah, let's do that. So we have skulls, which are -3. Sorry, -1, -3 instead if you have 5 or more cards in your hand. So actually, I was about to say that this does get easier as the scenario goes on. Technically, it also gets harder because at a certain point you're like, oh, we need to get to 10 cards, and so you'll most likely have 5 or more in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I usually find it actually kind of gets easier as it goes on, which is nice at least.
Mm-hmm.
So weird thing here, we have the cultist and the elder thing. They're out of order. Are both -2. If you fail, place one of your clues on your location. Hopefully you don't fail that, because that can be pretty bad, especially with locations that require clues, all the clues to be off in order to actually activate them.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's too tough to cover that on the test that you're trying to take, but all of the treacheries that come up, that's tough.
Indeed. Lastly, we have tablets, which are on -3. If you fail, discard a random card from your hand. That can be bad. -3s in the bag here are very bad, and you'll most likely fail on -3s. Um,
So I
so
believe
losing cards from that is really bad.
this is the Alejandro route.
Correct. Yes. So if you went Alejandro, it'll be a little tougher.
Speaking of,
Yeah,
I usually go for the custodian first. If I
I
can.
agree.
You get that extra card for everyone. That's really good. The only problem is if you don't time it right, the custodian runs away because he
And I
moves.
think that's why he moves at the agenda flips. That's why I try to go for him as fast as possible because I want to avoid him moving.
Mm-hmm,
Because it always goes to the location with the most clues on it,
mm-hmm.
and that doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot control him. In fact, if anything, it means that he'll get another shot because you need clues to be able to do him. But it means that it'll be more and more tough because, like, for example, if you like spawn these places, then it'll move over here, and that's pretty far.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the one I would do the first. After that, it kind of depends. Like maybe you need to split up with your investigators who can do the particular tests because there's a combat one, there's a intellect one is the Great Library, the agility one is here. This is if you don't have anything. There's no willpower one, but you have enough for willpower people to do, like on the treacheries and whatnot. So
Yeah, what I usually feel like I do is I stick to this quadrant and hope that the custodians spawned here.
mhm.
Because if everyone is here together, then they can kind of like, share skill tests, share commits to be like, oh, I have some combat cards, let's do this one right now. Like, oh, we have some agility cards, let's do it. All the while, the cloovers continue to get the clues off in order to be able to actually do the tests, etc.
Yeah, if he's
That's
here,
usually
you
what I
can
do.
get 4 done, right?
Exactly.
It's still tough because dealing with the hunters, this guy will, yeah, he'll move in if you've done this, right?
Exactly. I mean, and again, but like that's why I'm over there because this guy takes a long time to get over there, so you at
Mhm,
least
mhm.
have time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I that's usually why I never go here. I very rarely go to the Towers of Nakatas because I always find that I have like done these, like I've already done this one, so I'm like over here, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go to the Great Library in order to do this one, and then by that time I'm like, okay, probably time to end the scenario. I don't think I can get victory 2 off this.
But it's victory too.
It
Yeah.
is victory 2, I know.
Yeah, if you can swing it, like skipping this one, I mean it's easy, but it
Yeah.
can be very dangerous to go in here. Skipping this one, as far as victory points, probably skipping the victory 2, and you
Yeah.
just want to end in the Yithian Orrery, you'll be okay.
Yep.
If things go to plan. But they don't always do
They
that.
very rarely go to plan.
Yeah. All right. Um, so let's have a list of like we've talked about many of these things already, but I feel like it's still nice to have
Mhm.
some of these things to talk about. So back over here, I think there's 4 things on my list that are really tricky to talk about, and I use the same graphic as the beginning of this campaign because I forgot. Anyway, so the Yithian body is really hard, I think, on first play to figure out what to do. Right, use 2s across the board, and people don't really like losing their stats that they've been focusing their deck on for the entire campaign, and then losing their ability. Right, because sometimes you build often I would say you build your deck around your investigator ability, and sometimes the cards that you have don't really make any sense anymore, or you're counting on, I don't know, Kaimani being able to evade and disengage enemies, and you don't have much else you can do. So that's tough. Um, However, of course, it makes you think about the cards that are in your deck in possibly a second way, using it for icons. I don't usually build at the beginning of the campaign around this, but I might start to include cards with more skill icons when I get to like 4 or 5 in preparation of the scenario. What are your thoughts on just switching out your investigator entirely and having to use different stats and abilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. A lot of the ethos about building investigator decks is you want to be able to activate your investigator ability or at least take advantage of it as often as possible because otherwise, why are you playing that investigator?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're Zoe, you want to be engaging things. If you're Daisy, you want to have tomes that have actions on them. Um, Like, there's a reason that we build the investigators the way we do. Additionally, a lot of people build investigator their decks in terms of how good their stats are. So, like, if I'm Ursula Downs, I'm not going to include anything that has combat icons in my deck because I have one combat, and it's not like I'm going to test that, except for in this scenario.
Mhm.
Same thing with maybe one willpower rogues. Like, usually the way that they deal with their lack of willpower is either don't test willpower, aka things like you handle this one, or have cards that can boost it a lot, and not necessarily incrementally. Um, I think that's always something that they talk about with the decks that were in the core sets, and how, like, oh look, Roland Banks, here's a manual dexterity for you, because just in case you need to evade something. um like, immediately the first things that you do when you're like fixing those decks is like get rid of those, put in overpowers, right?
Yep.
But in this scenario, it really matters. Like, sometimes you really have to flex. You're like, oh, I forgot that 45 automatic has this agility icon. Well, I can't really play items right now. Maybe I need to use it against an evade, right? Um, it really does force you to be like, to literally look at your cards differently. Um, I think that I actually do think about this. Obviously, now that I've played this campaign a lot, I do think about this scenario a lot when it comes to deck building. I think more often than not, in the Forgotten Age, I tend to stick pretty like consistent with like at least 8 to 10 skills
Mm.
in my investigator decks, at least at level 0, so that I can carry it through. Um, and I think that having wild icons in this scenario is much, much better than having specific ones. So obviously, I think there's a lot of good wild icon cards. Like, obviously, there's Promise of Power and Mystic, but even in Seeker, there's like Inquiring Mind, True Understanding. Inquiring Mind is a bit tough in this one because there's a lot of things that require you to not have clues on places. But even cards like in Rogue, for example, Savant, and then there are some Guardian ones that I'm forgetting right now. But the way that I think about skill cards definitely changed after I played the scenario, where I'm like, maybe I need to think about skill cards that can be versatile. Like, I will take Unexpected Courage in this campaign just because of this scenario. Um, so
Yeah.
I think that it is really cool, at least in the way that it does that. However, I do understand other people's frustration if that is not what they wanted to do, for example.
Yeah, because it does sort of tie up some of your deck spots, and
Yeah.
that's kind of annoying. I will say that the wild icons is a big thing. I don't think having something like manual dexterity, if you don't normally use it, is a good idea, because there's no guarantee you're going to draw that card, right?
Yeah.
But the consistency of having, as you said, 8 to 10 skill cards, and maybe many of them have wild icons, that's totally possible with the larger card pool. With a smaller card
Totally.
pool, it's tougher.
I agree. So also, I think that a lot of, because of this scenario specifically, it means that this campaign is going to be a lot easier for specific investigators, specifically investigators that focus a lot on having skills, and so it doesn't disrupt their game plan too much by including those skills. Obviously, I'm talking about investigators like Silas Marsh and Minty Fan.
Hmm.
Although I am now realizing that I feel like Amanda Sharp still works really well, right? Like, it doesn't really matter that you're not getting full value out of your skills. You still have the same stats, right? Like, seems
That
good still.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah. Um,
One thing that I kind of wanted to ask that's related to this is, I've heard people say that the tests themselves are not that difficult uh, in this scenario. I don't think that's true. I think they're still threes and fours as before. So and you still have the -5 in the bag, right?
right.
So I think it's really challenging to even pass the test just committing one card. Like, you really do need to get up three, and you just pretend the -5 doesn't exist.
Yeah, so I will rebut that a little bit. So I think that for a scenario 6, the difficulties of these skill tests are lower than expected. I would say that they're on the par with at least scenario 1 or 2. Um, yes, we do have some difficulty for stuff like the crypt chills and the locked doors,
Hmm.
but most of the skill tests in this are actually 2s or 3s, I would say.
Yes,
Importantly,
but they're 2s or 3s for things that you probably weren't preparing for, I guess, right? That goes back to the your deck kind of has to be able to take skill tests that you're not prepared for.
of course, yeah, I get that. But even things like fight values and shroud values are significantly more around the 2 and 3 range as opposed to the 3 and 4 range in this scenario. Um, so at least in those senses that you have the ability to progress the game. Obviously, you still have cards that can give you static boosts like Magnifying Glass or Dr. Mylan Christopher, stuff like that,
Yes.
and your guns.
Yes.
But I think that with some exceptions, I agree with that. Like for example, Cruel Interrogations. That card, not in this scenario, a willpower 2 test is actually fairly straightforward, right? That's just the Yig's Fury. Well, no, that's not the
Curse
card.
of Yig.
Curse of Yig, thank you. That is the base difficulty of Curse of Yig. And while I agree that something like this is why I hate Frozen in Fear, because it is a significant willpower test that is a 3 difficulty. And for me at least, like Crypt Chill, you're just not expected to pass those. You're just like, yes, discard an asset, fine. So with that in mind, I think that ultimately it does shift the difficulties down for scenario 6. Putting them back in line with something like a scenario 1 or 2. I think that's how I see it, at least.
Yeah, I guess I don't disagree. I just think that maybe the dependency on willpower means that if you can't commit to those tests, and there's a lot of them, then you can find yourself having a problem, I think. Even drawing like a -3 or something means you'll take maybe 1 or 2 horror on the Rotting Remains. Depends on what you have to commit, I guess. And you have to keep those cards in hand. It's a challenge. Like, I think it's an interesting and cool challenge, but I don't think it's necessarily easier than usual, especially for your first playthrough, right?
I agree. I think that if anything, this scenario is definitely not blind friendly. I think that this scenario, if you know what you're doing, can actually be a breeze sometimes. But for people going into the blind playthrough, it is definitely one of the harder scenarios in this entire game, I think.
I think it's also hard for, even on your first or second time, to evaluate which are the important tests you commit to.
That's true. I think that also, I will say that I feel like is a skill that you get across the entirety of playing this game as well.
Yeah, very true.
Yes. But I do agree that it's like, sometimes you're like, oh, we need to pass these tests to be able to remember these things. But also, remember to look out for Cruel Interrogations because, oh, wait, you didn't know that on the 3rd act, you need to take a draw action on this encounter card? Type of deal. So,
all right, next thing is the item thing. Honestly, and the star there it's no items for the first, 4 or 5 rounds?
Yeah.
And then the star also is a little hint at the no unique items part, which, whatever. Like, I just don't buy those in this campaign. Like, imagine if your whole deck was built around using the Runic Axe.
Right. Or like a Red Clock.
The Red Clock doesn't do anything for you in terms of progressing the game. It just is helping you get through your deck and whatnot. But 10 experience points? Man, you don't want to lose that.
Exactly.
But I've definitely seen decks that are just like, I'm going to find the Runic Axe and that's all I need.
Right.
Uh-oh. Why did they do that? I guess it's just a flavor thing?
I think part of it is flavor. Like, perhaps what they knew to do is they had the cards, the Relic of Ages, and maybe not the Expedition Journal, but obviously the Expedition Journal doesn't do anything in the scenario anyway. I feel like they had the Relic of Ages and they were like, okay, we need to remove the Relic of Ages. What's a flavorful way to do that? And it turned into the non-unique item thing. Because I think that it fits with the flavor in terms of, like, yes, I am still Tommy Muldoon, but I don't have Becky with me because, I'm not in the same body, for example.
Right.
That being said, it's not like it's 100% flavorful. Obviously, Dr. Mylan went back with you and turned into a Yithian. and I'm like, sure, you're here. And like the reason they give in the campaign guide is they do not exist in this time period, which implies something about time travel, I guess. Um, so I mean,
But you do, I guess. Your body. Well, your body's not. No, your body is somewhere, right?
your body's still in the actually I don't know. But I mean importantly it's your mind that's been
Your mind has
transferred,
been
right?
stolen, right?
Yeah. Um so I mean yeah. I think that it's a little bit of a loose thing. And it is it to me at least, it's just something you just kind of have to think about when you're trying to do this campaign again. Um and if you are unlucky enough on a blind playthrough, then yeah, it kind of sucks.
Hmm. I honestly, it's the part that I don't mind out of everything that we're talking about. Is the part that I'm like, it's fine. You're gonna be fine. There is plenty of time if you play your cards correctly. You will get your items back. Don't worry about it. I played this as Bob once. I had so many items, but I was totally fine, right? There
Yep,
are other cards that you can play, and just survive the first 5 rounds. You'll be okay.
definitely.
Okay, the clue part. So if you can't get clues because you don't have any perceptions or anything else uh in your deck, you will have a bad time unless you took the pendant, as we mentioned before. A lot of like 3 or 4 player games, usually the fighter doesn't have anything to get clues,
Yeah.
and you can't even really help people that much because remember, as you said, the Yithian ability only works on your own skill tests.
Yep.
What do you think about this?
So I think that I'm actually okay with it. Um, as I said before, with the lost in time and space problem, where at some point you'll have to decide whether or not someone can get the clues, means that you're quote unquote holding everybody back. Um, and I agree that that can definitely maybe cause feel bads at least. Um, especially if like a bunch of like seasoned players are playing with like a newbie who doesn't have the ability to get those clues, and then you'll be like, okay, you're gonna have to die for us to live. Um, kind of effect. I can agree that that's kind of frustrating, or at least an unsatisfactory experience. But I do think that this scenario, specifically with how it uh with how it calculates its shroud values, I think does enough of a job in order for in order to allow anyone to get clues. Um, so think about it like this: there are at least one, two, three locations that have two shroud. The Towers of Nakatis and the Great Library, and importantly, and I'm pretty sure this is why they did this. The Great Library has the ability to refill with clues.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need clues, you go to the Great Library because you already have base 2 intellect. All you need to do is commit 1 intellect icon. You double it, you get to 4, you're up by 2, and that stops the cultist and the Elder Thing tokens from causing you to fail and place a clue in your location. Do that 2 or 3 times, and you're done. That's all you need.
Yeah,
I think
I
that,
agree with that. And you can also
yeah,
use testless cards to get clues testlessly. That's totally
of
an
course.
option.
Yes. I think that with that in mind, it's definitely something that, like, as someone with a bird's eye view on the scenario, that I figured out how to do that. So, again, blind playthrough, this is going to suck. Um, but it is there. It's definitely, it's still possible. I don't think it's prohibitively hard.
I think I just wish that they had hinted at some of this somewhere else in the campaign, like that your fighter is going to have to get clues in some way, or that you can only spend your own clues maybe elsewhere in the campaign. Because I often feel like I'm kind of thinking about this scenario, as I said, maybe a few scenarios later than you do, and then afterwards it's like I don't care about those cards anymore.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting thing to bring up when it comes to fighters getting clues, because it's kind of a thing where it's like I was never told that fighters that me as the fighter needed to get some clues. But it was also never told, like I was never told that our team has to have like okay, let me rephrase that. I agree that in the previous like 3 campaigns, the meta for this game, I don't know if even that's the right word for it,
Hmm.
has already been established. It's like you have cloovers and you have your fighters. I think already this campaign, what it has done is break up that team comp, because literally in scenario 1, you cannot a dedicated fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just kill everything, you will get like 5 vengeance and things will go bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to a certain extent, what this campaign is trying to do is trying to open up the minds of people who are stuck in the team comp of 2 cloovers, 2 fighters to a certain extent. And I agree that, like, I don't know if someone isn't, maybe that plugged into what the scenarios are trying to say, but it definitely does feel different than what you're used to. But I think that is intentional, at least.
That's fair. I mean, I personally think that everyone should be able to get clues and everyone should be able to deal with an enemy from time to time. So I welcome that. I'm just not sure that this scenario specific challenges are reflected in the rest of the campaign. Like you bring up the fighter thing. I agree that yeah, you don't need to kill everything. In fact, you shouldn't. But I guess maybe your point would be then what are you doing with your time then, right? Maybe you should be getting clues,
Right.
and that would be very helpful here eventually. All right, and of course if you can't do it, then you're driven insane. I actually don't mind that part about the campaign ending. That's kind of I think that's cool. Like you should be able to do 3 of those tasks and get out, but the scenario can be swingy. I mean, I don't know if you've ever lost this one, but with a group of 3, I've lost it twice. We couldn't get through. Not for lack of trying. It was really just those willpower tests that took one of the players out early, 2 auto fails, and that was it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I definitely think that if anything, this scenario has a problem with actually dying as opposed to dooming out, because I never doomed out in this scenario.
No, me neither.
But I have died before, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that maybe it could be the chaos bag, right? The chaos bag does its thing, but in my experience, it can be very swingy in terms of the consequences for failing the tests, right?
That's fair.
If you pass the test, and I know, like, of course, you're trying to pass most of the tests, but sometimes you don't, and then suddenly you have to get clues again in order to do one of the actions on the location. You take 2 or 3 horror, and you already had trauma. You're getting really close to the edge. So those consequences, I feel like for a campaign ending scenario, makes it a difficult a difficult scenario in general, just to sort of get through without biting your nails the entire time. And then I just
that does make sense.
mentioned the willpower thing as being, if you can't pass or try to pass willpower tests, being up like 2 or 3. And I know that's not theoretically that hard, but it is for some team comps over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. I think that if anything, this part goes against what I said previously, because I think that the game, as you've stated before, this campaign has already conditioned the investigators to be more flexible in their defensive stats and their willpower and agility.
Mm-hmm.
This one is full willpower, and you're like, oh god, I forgot I had to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and some of those are tough tests, even if they look like they're easy. Like I'm sure you've had the circumstance where you draw the I forget what it's called, the one where it's a test of 0.
Yep.
And you're saying, okay, I don't want to lose the cards in my hand. You draw a -5 or something, you lose all the cards, and you say, well, how am I going to get it back up to 10?
Yeah.
So that's tough.
It is tough.
I like challenging scenarios, though. I personally just wish that it was a little maybe all of these things didn't be part of the scenario. Maybe like they could have taken out one of these things to not make it so hateful.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that maybe this kind of feeds into my issue with the supplies system of this campaign, but maybe if they, as you were talking about with telegraphing, maybe if they better telegraph what the pendants would even do. Obviously, the whole mystery what the pendants do was a fun thing. Would be like, what does the thing even do? But it would be interesting if like there was something you'd be like, oh, remember the pendant? That's why. I mean, obviously the reason is because it reminds you of home, right? But like I don't know if there was like if you are bad at getting clues and or drawing cards, take this, or you know what I mean? Like,
yep.
Obviously that's not too much, but something.
Before we get into the rest of it, I think I just want to mention a couple of other tech cards for this scenario because there's a lot of things you can do if you're thinking about it. So, giving cards to other players. You don't usually get to do this, but
Yep.
there are a few cards that let you not pass cards per se, but let other players draw cards. So one is Stand Together level 3.
Yep.
Really nice card to just play, and you draw 2, someone else draws 2. It saves them the action for drawing a couple things. It's not one of those draw actions, by the way, right?
Yes, indeed.
Deep Knowledge.
Deep knowledge is definitely excellent in this scenario since those can go to anyone who needs them.
Even something like Empirical Hypothesis, if you have access to that, lets you draw cards at will
Yeah,
for no actions.
that's true. There's also a couple of items, specifically in Mystic / Seeker, the Scroll of Secrets and the Scroll of Prophecies, that you can choose other investigators to do those actions with.
Yep. So that's really helpful. I think there's some really nice Mystic builds that you can do, right? If you don't care about items, then you're not really slowed down. You do need to make sure you've upgraded your spells so that they get the boost on them.
Yeah.
Because 2 willpower is not going to cut it.
Indeed. Albeit, most likely you'll have other willpower boosting things like Holy Rosary.
Once you can play them, yes.
Exactly. Yes, of course. Oh yeah, that's what you mean. Yes.
And I like the composures a lot for this scenario.
The composure, I love the composures in this scenario. They are like literally perfect. They provide everything that you need.
And ultimately, even just like the pay to boost your stat cards in general are good. Like I know the level 0 talents are kind of not good, but having some other way to like get the break points in the chaos bag is very helpful.
I know they're items, but the masks in this scenario would be insane.
Yes, they would be.
Those aren't unique, right?
Nope.
I don't think so. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, you can only have one, but everyone can have one. Yeah, the Sphero mask, every time you draw Cruel Interrogations.
Yeah.
Yeah, those would be good. Yeah, just anything that gives you +2, really helpful. So I don't think it's always, especially with the whole card pool, you must have every skill card that you can take. There's the allies, I think, are always going to be fantastic.
Indeed, yeah. All of the allies that give stat boosts and or do extra things, like Peter Sylvester level 2 in this scenario is a god because not only does he stop you from dying from horror, but it gives you the willpower to pass all the tests. The Lola Santiago that gives you the intellect and the agility for those 2 tests, as well as getting free clues, is really, really good. Delilah obviously could be really good.
Greta.
Yeah, Greta is fantastic as well. Yes.
Yeah, so there's some good stuff. I think if you've been stuck by the scenario before, I think there's a lot of cards that can really, I wouldn't say like cheese it or anything because it's going to be tough no matter what. But if you plan a little tiny bit, and to me, if you just prioritize not dying, then I think you can survive long enough to pass the tests.
Indeed.
And get to the custodian right away. All right, I know we've talked a long time already, but we usually now talk about our ratings here. I think we'll try to make this as quick as possible, not to take forever on our discussion here. Replayability.
So I can start.
Yeah.
I will give this a 4 because, like we said, the blind playthrough is very tough, but the more that you play the scenario, I feel, the more of the intricacies of the scenario you tease out, and the more, at least for me, fun it is to actually win the scenario.
I think about the scenario a lot right before I'm playing it with a group. I'm really thinking about like, okay, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? So I don't know if like the word enjoy that I put here is the right term for that, but there's something about being able to return to it and think about, how can I beat it?
Indeed.
Which I like that a lot. I think that makes sense. I'm gonna go with 4 as well. Not gonna say that every playthrough is super different, although you can choose those 2 different paths at the beginning. I've done both, but there's merits to both, but usually I think you want to just kill the guy.
Indeed.
All right. Let's go to the next one, which is, well, the fairness question.
So this is an interesting question because I think that a lot of both fairness and balance are going to be tied together in this scenario
Mm-hmm.
because of how it affects the player investigators. Um, so I'm going to start with this. I think that the fairness of this scenario isn't the bad part, quote unquote. I think it's the balance.
You're right. That's what I was going to
As in,
say too. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I think that for the fairness, at least, I'm going to give it a 3 in the middle. It does still have really tough pressure points. For example, that cruel interrogations card. What the heck are you doing here? But ultimately, I think it's okay. But obviously, I'll talk more when I get to balance.
So, uh, what I wanted to bring up here was that even though there's a bunch of encounter cards that really pressure your hand size and discarding cards and whatnot, there's
Yeah.
also some pretty good ways to get around that. Like, unless it's at the very last turn or two, you are always going to be able to recover.
Yes.
That's been uh, my experience. I pointed out that one location that lets you like get cards back. It's
Yep.
huge. If you
It's huge.
draw an auto fail on something and you lost your whole hand, just go back there. You're fine.
Yep.
Actually, I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna actually give it a 4. It sounds crazy,
Okay. I mean,
but
yeah.
I think the players have a lot of control over the random elements outside of the chaos bag itself,
Yep. I agree.
and the scenario gives, I think, a lot of time. There's no ancient evils here,
Yep.
so
Unless someone takes an offer of power.
don't do that.
Don't do that.
Right. Well, maybe that just goes back to my point of like prioritize not dying from the horror, and then you should
Yep.
be okay.
Yep. Totally.
Okay, balance.
Okay. I think I will admit that this scenario definitely is, if you build your team wrong, you might lose in like the first 5 to 10 turns. Or at least not be able to come back from whatever's going on. This scenario definitely impacts some investigators way more than others.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, and also everyone is doing the same thing. You need to get clues, you need to fight things, you need to draw cards. So there are no multiple paths or strategies for the most part. And really, the only way to really do really well in this scenario is a little bit of cheese, with things that are like, oh yeah, I remember I have all these wild icons. I'm totally fine, and everyone's like, wow. So with that in mind, I think I'm gonna put it at a 1.5. I'm not gonna put it as a 1, maybe because it doesn't say if you are Father Mateo, you die. But that's where my thoughts are. What are your thoughts?
Did you know that I played this as Father Mateo and I died?
Well, there you go.
uh, it happened.
It did, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was able to pass all the other tests, but I think that might have been a time when I got close to dooming out or something, but I couldn't pass any of the tests on the locations.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I was a fighter, Father Mateo, and I had nothing to get clues.
Oh god.
So shriveling was fine. I could kill the enemies, but then I couldn't actually progress. Anyway, yeah, sure. 1.5 sounds right. I agree with you.
Yeah.
If you, man, I mean, they needed to give you a little bit more to play with, I think, in terms of the investigator ability. I don't know. Like I said, that whole list of things, like if they just removed one or two or something, I'd feel better about it. But it really
Yeah.
hurts some investigators more than others. Last time I played this was Charlie Kane, and
Oh,
it was okay because I had 2 charismas already.
yeah.
But if I was banking on, oh, I don't need extra charismas, I have 4, ally slots, then it's kind of bad. But even so, I could pass tests pretty well.
That's true.
Anyway, okay. Next one is the experience.
Just because they had the gall to replace your investigator card, I'm putting this at a 5. I love when this game does crazy shit. And this one was definitely like a oh fuck moment. It was a masked hunter on the back of an agenda moment. It was a you're not allowed to say the H word moment for me at least. That you got replaced by something else. I think that's so cool. And while I agree that most of the locations in the scenario are kind of just okay, they're kind of like, here, do the thing in here. Okay, you're done. And for the most part, you're kind of like teasing out what you're actually doing. Like, what does it mean that I'm dissecting an organ? Does that mean I'm learning, remembering how I'm trying to get back, and that's how I get back? And it's kind of weird. I really, obviously, like I love the one that's realizing what year it is, for example, because that one's
Yeah.
really flavorful. But the other ones are kind of okay. I have to give it a 5 for just doing the body Viethian stuff. That's just my thing.
And they've never come back to most of this, right? They've never told you can't play items. Um, yeah, I think the rationale you gave convinces me. I'll give it a 5 also. I also really love the text if you are all driven insane.
Oh yeah,
The resolution says something about you waking up and it's like 1935 or something. And that's like what happened there. Like, so you missed like 10 years or something and somehow you got back to Earth. It's really strange. You're like, I think there's a point where you ask someone what year it is. That of course it's 1935, and you're like, what?
yeah. Oh, and I know we didn't actually talk about this because we didn't talk about the interlude,
Ooh,
but just in case we didn't talk about it, the important thing about the interlude is the fact that if you don't do more than 3, you have a chance, or at least a big chance, of permanently replacing your investigator card with the body of Yithian. Which again, I think is super flavorful. Like you came back and you're still a Yithian somehow.
yeah. Even if you complete 4, that happens. Let's go talk about the interlude now while we finish
Yep.
things up for this video, since it it's between this scenario and the next one, right? Okay, so right 4, then the process backfired. 3, it's backfired spectacularly. So what you do is
Yes.
you have to
You have disadvantage.
yeah, you exactly reveal 2 tokens instead of random tokens from the chaos bag, and you pick the thing that is lower, or you just pick the one that you drew if it was backfired.
Yes. And
So
so
yeah,
if you reveal a skull token or any number other than a +1, you get out of body experience. All it does is it just replaces it just replaces your hand. Not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, it can do stuff, but it's actually okay, I think.
yep, it's fine. I've never actually had it before.
Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
But yes, if you do any of the symbol tokens, including the auto fail, not the skulls though, you will become the body Viethian for the rest of the campaign, which is pretty bad most of the time for me. At least it's kind of just like a game over because you're like,
Mhm.
I didn't want to do this over and over again. However, if you are Mister Preston Fairmont, this is almost a strict upgrade. um,
You no longer have to put resources into your family inheritance,
yes, but you still have it, which is
and you
important, I
still
believe,
have
right?
you still get the 4 resources every turn.
Yes. So all you did is you got a free +1 stats and a new reaction ability. Let's go.
If you're Lola Hayes,
Okay.
it's a little bit of a downside, the -1
A little bit.
everything.
Yes. But now your deck building is insane.
But I was going to say that you don't have to worry about doing things in your role.
That's true. I know there's also this thing about Yithians can't build decks. I feel like I don't know if this was ever ruled, but the whole Yithians can't build decks. I assume that the intention is like, oh, your deck building is what it used to be or whatever. Obviously, it explicitly says deck building requirements are the same, which is why Preston Fairmont still has his family inheritance, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I could see where you could rule it. You cannot add cards to your deck because you can't build decks. But more flavorful than not.
Yeah, I don't know what the ruling, if there's been one
Yeah.
at all. I'm not
I don't
sure.
know.
I'm not sure I've read one, but I don't know. I've never actually played with this card beyond this.
Me neither. Yeah. But yeah, Preston loves being a
scenario.
awesome.
What else in the interlude?
Yeah, so if you got 2 or more tablet tokens, aka you've been going down the Alejandro route, you attacked his Chaka in the first scenario, and then you gave the relic to Alejandro in the second. And also you rescued him, because that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And the custodian was under the investigator's control. The custodian was Alejandro!
Yay!
Oh my god, yay! That's where he was. He's not racist. He
Nope.
was a Yithian.
Alejandro remembers everything.
Yay! And also you get your 3rd tablet token. So yeah, this is the Alejandro route, the culmination of it, and it will matter later.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he is set against 2, as he normally is.
All right.
Lastly, if you have something about chalk, in the next scenario, if you don't have chalk, you cannot take mulligans. Having chalk is good. You should probably have chalk.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the ration, so you lose the resources, and the medicine with the poison spread. You're going to get a physical trauma if you're poisoned and don't have medicine. Otherwise, you can spend medicine to get rid of poison. I think that's it. Oh no, there's more. That's right. Blanket. Same thing as before. You get some trauma if you don't have a blanket.
Yeah, maybe get all the supplies if you can.
Maybe get all the supplies if you can. Yes, and then it's just on to Yoth, and you're venturing down. And that's where you are.
All right. I know it's like this is one of the longest scenario recaps that we've talked about, but there's so much here. Let us know what you think of this one. I know everyone has an opinion, so let us know what it is. And
Indeed.
We'll also talk about the return too, which shakes things up in a very tiny way, and we'll kind of rate how we think that changes the overall experience as well. We're back for the return 2, and they just have a few new cards. So you might notice the map is a little bit bigger. It's already a pretty big map. So where are we? We're down at the bottom now. There's a new Hall of Nakatus that says it's also connected to the other ones that we saw before.
Yep. Effectively adding a new hall. It has the same text as the other ones and is connected to these other quarters, except the northern. I don't believe it's connected to them, so you have to go 2 around.
Okay.
And when we get to Act 2, which we can do right now, I guess, we will have 2 more things that we can do. We can read about Earth, and we can see a familiar specimen. Same condition, though. We only need 3 of them. And right now, I'll just talk about it because at the end, it doesn't change the resolution, meaning that if at least 6 were completed, then the process would perfect and you get the 4 bonus experience. So there is no reason, I believe, to get all 8, but now you have some more options to get 6.
What's on the other side here? Yeah, just
it's just the same thing, and then the reminder text about the new ones.
Okay. So we've got 2 new things to look at. So how about the Cyclopean Vaults first?
Yeah, 5 Shroud. Jesus Christ. 1 per clues and victory 1. As an action, you can discard each non-weakness card in your hand. As an action, if you have no cards in your hand, remember that you read about Earth. And then as a double action, if you have fewer than 5 cards in hand, draw until you have exactly 5 cards in your hand. So it's tough that it does say non-weakness. So, for example, Occult Scraps, which stays in your hand until the next parts of the act is it's bad. If you're Patrice and have the Watcher in your hand,
oh god,
that's tough to get rid of for sure. But at least you're not having to discard your hand every turn because you don't have an ability anymore.
5 Shroud, I forgot about that. So there are a few higher Shroud locations here.
This one definitely pulls it up there. This is prime targets for your free clue getting Drawn to the Flames.
Absolutely.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
I think this is kind of neat though that they give you a way to build your hand back up though.
Indeed, and it's not only useful for the action to read about Earth, but later on, if you're like, I have 2 cards, it's better to take a double action instead of just taking 3 draws, for example.
Oh, I just remembered. I had, when I played this once as York, another good tech card, Nothing Left to Lose.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
All right. The other location.
All right, and yeah, we have an Alien Conservatory. 2 Shroud, 1 per clue. No victory on this one. While you are here, you have to decrease your max hand size by 2, meaning that you could theoretically decrease your max hand by 6 in the last agenda. Holy god.
No.
And then you're going to have to do a triple skill test. Willpower 1, then Agility 2, then Intellect 3 to see a familiar specimen. That could be pretty bad.
That's hard, right? We talked about
that
before
is
how
hard.
having to pass the test, like repeated tests, is tricky. Here, it's 3 different skills.
And if you fail, you're like, oh god, I could do it next turn. But then you're like, oh god, I have to discard my hand down to 2 cards because I'm in this location, for example.
Yeah, you can't stay here for very long.
Luckily, if you have a pendant, it does do nothing. So
that's true. Also, you don't need to do this one.
Exactly. So this is honestly part of the fault about this return to scenario. I still don't do these.
This one,
They're much harder.
I've done this one.
That's true.
Like sometimes you can hang around here. I know you usually like to hang up here,
Yeah.
but if you're kind of in the area and you're about to lose all your cards, you can just go here, take an action, and you've done one of the things.
That's true, but there's also it's the 5 shroud victory one. It's like I'm not getting those.
No,
clues.
it's true.
So bad.
Yeah, you don't need to do this, but it is nice that
Exactly.
they added 2 extra things in case you're having trouble with any one of the other ones.
That is true. That is true.
So you can still get your 6. All right, these come with their own enemy.
Yes, the captive subjects they spawn in the alien conservatory, and they are also aloof like the other 2 cards I can remember. And they gain lose aloof and gain hunter if you have done either of these things, read about Earth or saw familiar specimen. Notably, they had 2 fight, which is actually okay, but 5 health is a lot of health, and that 2 horror does not help, especially when you've taken rotting remains.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is
They
this might be a trap to try to deal with these guys.
also have retaliate, which is pretty bad.
Oh god.
Again, another reason why I don't do these 2 because I just don't want to deal with these things.
Well, you can have an enemy around for your damning testimony. Just leave them
true.
there.
Trish can use them to get the clues off the Cyclopean Vaults as a bonus, for example. Yeah.
Well,
that is the scenario.
that's it. That's the only changes.
Yep.
So, and again, I think it's a slight improvement just because it gives you a few options, but these are hard.
Yeah, that's my real issue with it is that the options they give you are just harder than the other ones, so it really doesn't help. But as you said, they are options, so that is nice.
All right, that's the shortest discussion we've ever had. So
There you go.
we'll go to Depths of Yoth next week. Thank you for following along and listening to an hour and a half of the City of Archives. Go play this this scenario and tell us what you think. See you later.
Bye bye.